Welcome everyone to today's social system mapping deep dive session for today, October. Is it really October 21st already?
I know.
It is. Oh my. Okay. So your hosts today, as usual, are me and Kara, greater than the sum and social system mapping. And for today's agenda, we'll do some brief chat intros in a moment. And then Sarah Shanahan, one of our longest term community members and favorite network weavers, and one of my favorite collaborators, is going to share this different kind of map that we made. Not a usual social system map. It's built onto an existing social system map, and we're pretty excited about it. So I'm glad to see you all here with us. So let's go to, and then we'll have some question and answers at the end of Sarah's presentation. And then I'll stick around. I don't know if Sarah will stick around, but at least I will, and anybody else who wants to can stick around for we have the formal, which is not all that formal with us, but the formal presentation goes to the top of the hour, and then we will and then we just have if you want to ask more questions or have more conversation or just connect, you can stay for an informal post-session half hour. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing and go to the and Belize, if that's.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, welcome. Glad to have you join us.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the chat, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves a little bit. So if you could put in the chat, 1 second. Name, pronoun, location. For yourself in the moment. Carla's in Canada. So we have a couple Canadians thus far. Cool. Another Canadian. I'm seeing a pattern and I'm getting suspicious. There's a little teeny bit of network thing going on here. Is that correct? Cool. That's great. And once you're done with that, if you want to go ahead and you can start on. And I heard that accent, so I was suspicious, Seamus. What's one primary network that you're either part of or working with or thinking about? We assume that if you're here, you have some kind of relationship to network weaving, and usually there's a real network in there somewhere. And Brian, are you in Taiwan right now? Are you in? You're okay, because I need to respond to you, and I was thinking about where you are for scheduling. So we're sitting here together from kind of all over the world. A lot, of course, in North America, but other parts. SI network, cool. Did I say, yes, I said that about the networks you're part of. Nice. And then if you've done that one or you're skipping that one, I guess that, Tanya. Our last question for our check-in is, what brings you here today? What's a main question you're holding, or a thing you're looking to get out of the session? Nice, Brian. Tom Ripples. Hey, Sarah. Everyone's always curious about you. Cool, Elise. Sarah and I did a session of several months ago about the beginning of this process. We had not gotten to actual mapping yet, but we talked about how we were thinking about it and what we were learning in the process. And so that's the session Elise, I think, is referring to. And so that's great because that is definitely the chapter 1. And this will be chapter 2. Okay, great. So welcome everyone. I'm happy to have you all here and hope that you all get something fun out of today's or useful out of today's session. So I'm gonna just go ahead at this point, I think, and hand it over to Sarah. And Sarah, you might want to just say a tiny bit about who you are as well as jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually like quite a few newer faces for today's call, which is really cool to see.
Yeah.
But I am Sarah Shanahan. I'm Director of Community Management for the REAMP Network. The REAMP Network is a network of nonprofits. We have about 130 member organizations who are all thinking systemically and acting collaboratively so we can equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest by 2050. And I have personally been with REAMP. This was my 16th annual meeting that I just attended. So as Christine kind of alluded to in the introduction, I think that's just something unique that I bring to the field is just the fact that I've lived and kind of grown up professionally in a network like REAMP. So hopefully this will be interesting. Now, I'm going to set you up for a little disappointment because I'm just going to say that the intent behind this mapping work that we did was really about capturing the ripples. And that's still kind of a work in progress. So maybe there's going to be a part 3 next year sometime when we get a little bit more data about that. But this was still an incredibly valuable journey for us. So maybe I should first kick it off by just kind of quickly kind of reminding those of you who are new, just sort of how we got to where we're at today. And so what happened is that earlier this year, I realized it was going to be REAMP's 20th birthday. 20 years since the first 20 network members came together. And part of my inspiration then for this year was I said, hey, I kind of want to be able to kind of look back and talk about the impacts that our network has made over the 20 years so we can celebrate this at the annual meeting. So that was one thing. The other thing that has, and this is what I've seen in your introduction so far in the chat, is we've also, because we're a network, we've had this long-standing desire to do a better job of capturing the ripple effects, right? Because REAMP doesn't get to take credit solely for all the really good climate and energy work happening in the Midwest. That's our members who are actually doing that work. And at the same time, we're still playing a role in that, right? Whether it's, by helping them think differently or come together to strategize or, giving them money to do big work, whatever it looks like we're still playing a role. And we know we have a big influence over people. And it's sometimes really hard for us to tell that story or to show it or to have the data to say, hey, because of REAMP, these folks in Iowa started a ratepayer Bill of Rights campaign. So it was these two things that I think were coming together that caused me to go to Christine and say, hey, what might be possible here? And when we first started this journey, we weren't sure what was going to be possible. And so we said, hey, actually, before we even think about getting to some of the technical aspects here, we actually just need a little bit more information. And so if this is a little sneak peek from the previous session that we referred to, where I really just started doing some one-on-one interviews with members, started trying to capture what I heard were some of the big impacts, and we called those milestones. And just started trying to capture those. In these frames down here is where I started trying to tease out some of the relationships between them. But all of this pre-work was incredibly valuable and important to do. So I definitely want to underscore that as part of the story. But of course, I know that session was recorded. So if you really want to do a deep dive into this portion of it, you can watch that recording. But so that's kind of where we started. And again, the lens of all of this work was really, hey, we're having this annual meeting in September. That is really going to be the time to tell the story. Now, what I can say is this mapping, like I said, like I think this was something that was really surprising for me because I don't think I would have been able to deliver that story of 20 years of why reamp has mattered if I had not done all of this work to try to develop the map. Because the map and starting to visualize some of these things is what gave me the insights to first realize, like, what is the overarching narrative that I want to tell about our network? Two, what are some of those like big milestones or big impacts? Like, where do we see a lot of relationships being drawn to? Because it was clearly something that was big and mattered. And how could we keep this as sort of like a living artifact, right? Something that we can kind of come back to over and over again. So I think at this point, Christine, I was thinking about going to a little bit of the presentation that I gave to kind of talk a little bit more about how the mapping sort of helped us see the story here. But before I did, I just wanted to pause and see if there was anything about this sort of framing that you wanted to add any color to.
No, I think that's a good next step. And just to reassure, so I think what I'm thinking is I know that people are, and I've told you this, are going to have questions about the hows. And so definitely I love the PowerPoint, and let's go through that. And
Yep.
then, but just want to reassure people that we will get to sort of the technical process of how we did in an overview way. But just so you can see how it fit in with social system mapping and with some app.
Yep.
Yep.
The technical stuff. That's the boring stuff. You don't need me for that because I don't even know what's going on. I do sense making and visioning. For those of you who don't know me, that's my area of expertise in this work. But let's talk a little bit about this presentation that I gave, right? Because this is where the map really was useful. And I will say, when I first started this project, my framing, my own personal framing was I want to talk about the 20 years of impact. What are all of the big milestone policy wins, whatever it was that we're going to be cheerleading and celebrating? But as I started doing this work, I actually realized like there was some of that in here, of course, right? But the bigger and more important overarching narrative that I uncovered as I started doing the map was this narrative of people coming together to do big things. Like that was the story over and over and over again. So in some of these early screenshots too, you'll see the sort of the change in the network over time, which really helped me hone in on, again, that story of evolution of Reamp. And I don't think without the map, like even some of these time frames and the way that I've labeled these periods of time in our history, again, I could not have come up with these without doing the mapping work, because it was the map that sort of let me see what was important, what was connected, what was showing up during different time periods. And all of that was really validated with the sourcing that I was getting from having conversations with people, from digging through old reports, old artifacts, old photos, all kinds of stuff that really helped bring this together.
Sarah, can I give you a reflection that I'm hearing right now?
Yeah.
So because I was part of, not as much as you, but I was in significant ways part of this project, in this thinking. What I'm hearing is that you're saying, in a way, the mapping, the figuring out how to map was the process of doing that, like, exposed you to a ton of information. And I remember in the beginning, your head swimming, like, how do I make sense of this information and represent it usefully, because we can't put every single thing, every single possible whatever on the map. And that process itself helped you start to see, and I watched you do this, start to see patterns and themes in terms of the evolution. So we were in this phase, and it helped you, like, see the bigger picture of all that details. But we had to really struggle with what's important, what are we seeing, what are we learning. And so I'm hearing you
Yeah.
say that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even like doing the time stamping too, like that was a component of all of this research, I think too, that again just kind of helped us see the story
And
as part of it.
we kept changing it, right?
Yeah.
Like we started having a bunch of years, and then it was like, let's break it down to 5 years because this is too much. And then it was like, well, actually, I'm seeing there's shifts at these certain points in time that if we hadn't done this whole big sort of pattern spotting at the higher level with a whole ton of data, my guess is that wasn't in your head and you wouldn't have really been thinking of it that way. But then we realized, oh, there's phase shifts in here. And that's how we did the timeframes. But it took us
Mhm.
a lot of back and forth and looking at it and thinking about it to get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's spot on.
Okay. I'll be quiet now. Get out of here.
No, no, it's fine. So, when we, again, as we sort of got going on this, we realized that there were really kind of 5 chapters, I think, to Riam's story. And to Christine's point, like, it wasn't like they were all in certain specific increments of time, but we kind of arbitrarily came to these based on what we were seeing in the map, again, what we heard from people from conversations, and what we found from digging into the records. And for re-up especially, like, I thought this map really told this story well because we went from like this whole like this network thing is launching, right, with 20 people and just a few things to all of a sudden like really starting to explode and becoming this thing on the map that people were attracted to and really wanted to get more involved in. And as a result, like the network responded too, as more people kind of came in, the network also responded and grew. We added more funding opportunities. We added more ways for people to get engaged and collaborate. And that really kind of took place up until about 2012, I would say, when we really saw this big burst of growth in the network. And, what's true with every network, I think, is um, growing is really exciting and it can be a little painful. You get some growing pains if you grow too big too quick, and that was something that we really noticed in Reamp too. It's a little harder to see. I think I'll show you the actual Kumu map as well. But what we started doing during this time was, we were trying to be really responsive for members. And so we just kept adding more ornaments onto the Christmas tree. And that's really what you see here, right? Like all of these extra little houses, for example, right? Like those were all extra structures we put in. We have check marks with like the little extra policies. We were funding all of this campaign work. We were having all these meetings. And when you compare that, to even the period before, right, like there was far less structure and activity than what we see by 2012, right? And again, like we were noticing this building up of tension, from between policy advocacy and organizing, helping people fund campaigns or funding the work you need to put together a really excellent campaign. Having just enough rules to mitigate power imbalances, without being like too chaotic, right? All of this was really happening during this big shift. And then, at least for us, I would say this around this like 2017 or so time period is for Reamp when we really kind of got serious about putting equity into practice. We developed more policies and procedures to help us do that. We really kind of changed up some of the strategies and the ways that we were bringing people together. There was just a lot of changes overall that were happening in that time, which really brought us to where Reamp is at today, which, still looks like a big, messy, messy network for sure. But it has been really interesting to see, again, where are those milestones on the map that have the most connections coming out of them? Because clearly, like, they've had a big influence in our network, whether it's early on or even today. So that was a little bit just about the mapping and how those chapters emerged. I don't know, Christine, do you think I don't know if I need to go through like the rest of this story piece. Maybe we'll just head over to the map and I can talk a little bit more about what we saw in the map itself.
Yeah, but just so everyone knows, we'll provide a semi-redacted, we're taking out internal stuff that doesn't, that Sarah can't share publicly, but we will give you a version of this
Yeah.
slide deck. In fact, Kara, if you're ready with it, you could put it in the link now. So if you want to see the rest of what Sarah presented, at the annual meeting, you can.
Oops. I need to go to-
And just now, I'm going to point out what Sarah's doing for those of you who understand anything about Kumu. She's in Kumu. You may not know this because we don't generally use it, but in Kumu, you can have more than one mapping project based on a different database in each project. I mean, not project. There's you have a Kumu project, and you can have different maps within that Kumu project, and each map can have its own, being fed by its own data set. And so when Sarah's clicking on between the, Sarah, we just show the drop down, don't shift, but the map drop down. Sorry, up, there. No, oh, yes. So just showing that drop down. Thank you. So the main map, don't click. The main map is the social system map that Sarah and I have made and had kept alive now for what, since 2017, I think, or 2018. Has been iterating it over the years. And so that's in the same project, but this is coming from, and eventually we'll combine the data sets. But right now, this is coming from an organization's project, in some app. So right now they're coming from different data sets. And I just wanted to show you how we're sort of going to ooch them into the same one eventually. But right now, this is its own map with no people in it.
Yep.
Okay, that was maybe a technical segue that was awkward and unnecessary, but
no, it's okay. And like, speaking of other like just technical things that we really had to wrestle with and figure out was even this legend, like coming up on the language of how we wanted to describe like individual milestones in the map. Like that was also another whole body of work in terms of trying to figure that out.
yeah.
And another thing that we were trying to do too with this is we were trying to think about the time tagging, right? Like how do we tell the story over time, with these milestones and with these types of activities. So in the slide deck that I had showed earlier, I had those various chapters, and that's what we put up here at the top. For this, it's like a showcase view for those of you who are familiar with some of the mapping. Or no, it's not. This isn't a showcase view, is it?
No, it's just subviews. Do you want to just click through them quickly?
Yeah.
So we can see, they can see the technology. So this is chapter 1, next is chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. So that's what's going on in those images that were in the slide deck, is just we're filtering based on the time frames.
Yep. And something else that I thought was kind of interesting too is, I was really looking at our structures in one of our views, because again, like talking about like the Christmas tree analogy I used earlier, I had actually used this a way, I kind of filtered on all these and just played around with them to look at them again as me trying to get a better understanding of what that story of what our narrative was really looking like over time. So this was also really interesting. I will say, I told Christine one of the only things that, like, if I was going to change this in a different way, what I might like is, by the time we get to talking about like relating today, for example, like if I just click on this one overall, like this has just the things I think that came up for this year, which is really useful. But in the story presentation that I gave for the network, as you clicked on these things and it adds them over time, what it means is when you go through the story this way, like when we get to relating today, it does include all of the older artifacts of things that may not really be in existence anymore today, or not really being used, right? So it's like an artifact of history, which is nice in terms of telling the story overall. But what I have found as I played around with this more is sometimes, like, if I just care about really kind of zooming in on a specific time period, like today, for example, or a different time period, really clicking all those off and just clicking on the one, like that'll just really show you the time periods of that chapter, I guess, which was really kind of useful. At least again, in thinking about sort of what our journey has been so far.
Can you explain the different connection lines that are,
Oh, yeah, I forgot about those. So that's good. Let's see if we can find some big ones. Okay, here we go. This one seems like a good. All right. So one of the things that we did try to play around with too is like we recognize that there, like going back to like the ripple portion of this mapping, right? There are some things that have happened in the network that we have had direct control over, right? We've enacted the policy and procedure. We gave the money for this, whatever it is, like we've done something. In other cases, there have been impacts from the network that may show up as a milestone that maybe we didn't necessarily have direct control over, but was influenced by the network, right? So this is where we really get to the rippling. So, for example, Reamp did this initial systems map. That's how we got our launch, and that directly led to us doing things like creating some working groups or creating the steering committee. But as a result of this initial map and the launch of the network, oops, what did I just do here? Okay, Sarah's getting a little frisky. Another indirect outcome of that initial systems map was the fact that the climate movement started focusing on stopping the coal rush, in addition to some of the other things they were doing. So we tried to express these things, and some of you may have seen this from other map designs, but we tried to use a solid line to show a direct impact and a dotted line as an indirect impact from milestone to milestone relationships. So, and these so far have just really been inputted by us. So, just kind of what we know from our own heads and minds. I think we personally have a lot more to do in this regard, in terms of helping connect what some of these relationships might be between milestones. And one of the ways that we're doing that, besides like on staff, and I was going to kind of segue to the Sun app right now, Christine, unless there's anything else you want to say about the map before I do.
nope, that's perfect timing. I was going to suggest we go
Okay.
into a little bit of the how,
Perfect.
and then
Yep.
open for questions.
So we're trying to gather more. So a lot of what we've seen here on the map so far, again, has really kind of come from me, whether it's by way of interviews and talking with people, digging in the records, whatever that is. Like I've been doing a lot of taking what I've heard and trying to put it in here. But at our annual meeting this year, as part of showcasing our 20 years of impact, we also wanted to invite members to also start telling us a little bit about how some of our program services, some of the milestones of the network have also mattered to them. So
Sarah, can I insert a little bit of how-to stuff before you go into
yes,
work? Okay. So for those of you who know what I'm talking about, and if you're brand new, you might not, but we have lots of resources pointing to these other things. So I'm not going to go deep into them, but in order to do this, even though we're starting with most of this being Sarah's gathering of the data and inputting of the data, our intention is down the road to be able to add input from the entire network. So for that reason, we built it in SumApp with the vision of eventually the data would be getting sort of crowdsourced. And so how we did that was we used the dual elements feature of SumApp, which is you can take two separate projects, mapping projects in SumApp, and one is for individuals, which we had already had a full robust map going on for individuals, and we added another project for that would normally be used as a elements for organizations or coalitions. You can see Evan presented last week a really cool version, a map he did with using dual elements. And in this case, we're saying the collective entity elements are the milestones. So we're using dual elements, and the milestones are essentially the org elements. And for how we have gotten that data into SumApp is that, so it would have been really hard for Sarah to both be inputting nodes in SumApp, because normally we'd be gathering these crowdsourced, not one person doing it, at the same time that she's trying to think about how is this related to that, et cetera. So we couldn't just have her start inputting stuff directly in SumMap. It would have been too cognitively challenging. I would have just messed with, would have been hard. I mean, we sort of thought about it and concluded it was not really a good idea. So we had a spreadsheet for the milestones where we had columns for each of the dimensions, like what's the time frame it existed, what kind of milestone is it, policy or structure or campaign, etc. So we had a bunch of columns, and we kept sort of shifting, what columns do we need, what columns are we going to keep. But once, you know, we got to about 80 to 90% of the nodes that we knew that we were going to gather, we loaded them via the pre-existing data function into SumMap. So all the nodes then were created in the spreadsheet and loaded into SumMap. And then we made a spreadsheet for Sarah that had drop downs for each of the nodes so that she could quickly go through this spreadsheet and say this to this, that to that, and just create basically the to and from columns in the spreadsheet. And then so that she could think while she, I mean, so she could like just get that thought out. And then once that was done, she had a staff person input all those connections manually, which was, well, I think Sarah did a lot of it, which was very tedious. So this is not like SumMap was used, but it was most of the data structuring and gathering was done outside of SumMap up to this point. And it was about as tedious as if you had just done it without using SumMap. But again, we were setting it up for the next phase. I think that's, does anybody, especially you guys who I know the dual elements and know Kumu, have any technical questions right here that are obvious things I've left out, just clarifying based on what you already know? And
a technical question. It's really cool to hear this process because this is Evan Karras, by the way. I also have a dual elements map. And it's cool to hear this process because I also did a lot of pre-population.
yeah.
I used Airtable, which had, different, maybe some different design options for logging connections all in one place. So that I could have that kind of offline version.
Yep.
That would mirror the SumMap. So I'm ready. My mind is spinning as I'm thinking about the Excel version, the Google Sheets version. So I really just appreciate seeing the kind of internal view of this.
Yeah. And, our goal with SumMap is not to need spreadsheets, but when we're pushing the boundaries or we're in a region that SumMap just doesn't have the, the resources to build in, then we can do this sort of thing to help with a bunch of thinking steps. So, okay. So
I actually felt like this part of the process for us early on was important to help me get more clarity, right?
Yeah.
Before we started messing up everything into a map version. I think we must have done 4 or 5 different versions of this sheet. Some of these columns ended up being useful. Some of them didn't, it was a very iterative thing that over time we kind of got more clarity on about, what is an element? How would we categorize it? When is it happening? Was it directly or indirectly? Just sort of what was its impact as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so then let's go to, so I'll just preface, I'm just giving a little technical preface, Sarah, and then you can go into a little more detail about this. But our vision, our hope was that we would be able to not only have a map of saying, this event or milestone, was directly or indirectly caused by that one. And, these are all the things that this milestone generated. So with that, a narrowly defined ripple effects map. We wanted to have, we want to be able to do that, but we also, and this is why we use SumMap, wanted for people in the network to be able to say, I had a relationship to that ripple effect, or I was, the leader of that ripple effect, or I was impacted by that ripple effect or that milestone. So we wanted to enable the network itself to say, where it had a meaningful relationship, where the members themselves had a meaningful relationship to the various milestones that we mapped. And I will hand it off to Sarah now. I just wanted to sort of say that as the logic for what Sarah's now going to show.
Yeah, which is really kind of our next step. Again, we demonstrated, what we had developed so far in conjunction with the story of 20 years of REAMP. And, at the close of the annual meeting, we also invited people in the network to maybe share with us a little bit about how different milestones in the network may have impacted them. So all the milestones that we had put together so far are here. And we have encouraged people to come in and tell us a little bit about how these have impacted them. So one way they can do that is we do have sort of like pre-populated ways of saying, hey, like, yeah, I was a part of this, or maybe I helped create it, maybe I was inspired. But I think the key box that might be really interesting for us going forward is this: what else happened, right? Like, you may have showed up to this or maybe helped create it, but why did it matter, right? How did it change something about you or what you've done, right? And that's that key of like getting to those ripple, right, impacts of the network. So, we're going to be thinking about ways over the next year to be encouraging people to come in here and say some things. And then it's going to be a whole nother can of worms to come in and start reading through these, doing some pattern spotting, doing some sense making, seeing how else it may contribute to the development of our map, because, we'll probably see and be inspired to make some changes based on what people write in here. I think it's going to be challenging to get people to come in here and tell us about some of these milestones, because it's of course like just extra work for them to do. So I think we as REAMP need to be thinking creatively about ways that we can get people to do that. And one of the things too is that, if there's a milestone that is in somebody's head that is not here on the list yet, right now we're just hoping that we're encouraging them and hoping that they'll write it in the open-ended box. Because beyond that, we don't really have a great way of inviting people from the network, at least at large, to contribute to developing more milestones. We do have some ways for staff to do that are just a little bit more complicated. So this is just something we're noticing and we're aware of and we're going to be thinking about. And yeah, I think there'll be more to come. Like I said, I feel like there's going to be a chapter 3 as we get a little bit more data, kind of keep refining this and really seeing what it leads to.
I just want to, as you're talking, I'm thinking it might not be, I was just wanting to share in my mind, these aren't necessarily in your mind yet or wherever, but part of the, for me, the impetus for people to be able to say how they were related to a milestone. Now, this could be so, I mean, when I think about it, I get kind of scared because I'm like the person who has to actually like turn it into something visual. But and there could be just a whole lot of connections. If people actually were gung-ho and just sort of jumped, sorry, different word, but if people were actually really into it and went in and they probably won't, but if they did, there could be so many connections that it would just make a huge pile and it would be really hard to make sense out of it. But part of to me, some of the reasons you might want to do that are, first of all, just so that people who have been present and engaged and active for a long time feel represented and feel like their work is being honored. Sometimes it's a little uncomfortable when people say, oh, this wonderful thing happened and I started it and I know how much work it was and nobody knows that but me, right? I mean, that's happened to me in the world and it doesn't, it feels like, okay, so you're getting all the glory from this thing that I really worked hard for, but I'm not getting any recognition at all. It's uncomfortable. So we don't want to be doing that to people in the network. We want to be honoring them, but also if someone has been part of several initiatives, has helped to generate them or has been inspired by them, someone else in the network might want to say, oh, you had something to do with all of this. I really want to learn from you, or how did you figure this out? Or, you know, then you can start to backtrack through the milestones and actually find some of the, you know, the knowledge and the experience that went into those and learn from those people. If the, you know, like, because it often we're moving forward and we're not capturing what did we learn, how did we do that, what was useful, and making, you know, a breadcrumb trail or sharing the resources. But if we can at least find who might have that still in their head, then we have that's another resource and another opportunity that there isn't really another way to get at. So, yeah, big aspirational, messy stuff. And as usual, I would anticipate that a lot there will be some kind of pushback, like, you don't expect me to answer all these questions, do you? Or this is ridiculous. And the answer, as usual, will always be, it's optional. If you want to, yay. If you don't want to, don't bother. But it's just an opportunity. Okay.
Yeah. And Brian, I saw you put in the chat, you were curious about like the milestone to milestone, like connection relationship piece. So for us right now, we just have the direct or indirect, and that is something as staff, like we're determining and we're putting in the map. So our members aren't being asked to tell us about that relationship. Although maybe we're going to find some stuff as they put some stuff in that open-ended text box. I'm not sure. But at least for now, as staff, we've just kind of made that determination on our own.
Yeah. And there were places in this whole project where, looked at from one angle, we could see, you know, a lot of variation that we might want to capture. And then when we grapple for a little while, and then we go, oh, let's keep this simple for this round. Like, okay, that just opened up too many cans of worms, both in terms of the effort, but also in terms of, you know, maybe we think those are very, you know, just like in terms of the thinking that needed to be built on, like maybe we're cognitively 3 steps ahead of what's possible to even contemplate at the moment. So we would sort of do this like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, kind of simplifying thing as well in terms of the complexity of what we were trying to get at. Is there anything else in the chat that feels like it's glaring and hasn't been addressed yet, for any of you who put it in there?
I'm laughing because I feel like for some of those moments, Christine would give me a job like, hey, you need to go through and come up with categories for this column. And then as I'd start doing that, I'd honestly just get frustrated and just be like, no, this is just too messy and hard. It's got to be simple. Or sometimes it'd be in reverse where we'd start talking about something and Christine's like, well, here, it's this and this, right? Well, no, like it's more nuanced than that. And then you just end up opening up a whole can of worms only to come back to being like, no, we need to keep it simple.
Yeah.
There was a lot.
So I'm just seeing Mary's comment. Were there any surprises about how change really happens versus, and are you, Mary, is the question about Sarah's like reamp's theory of change? Is that the theory of change you're comparing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I don't think so. You know, I think surprisingly, our theory of change seemed really consistent after doing this project. Again, I think what was surprising is like I had hoped to do this project and stand up and be like, let me tell you about the 20 best impacts that Reamp has made over 20 years. And that just wasn't the story at all, right? It was the story of people coming together to figure tough things out together. You know, it was really
Which is, and that's your theory of change, right?
It is. That is our theory of change.
I mean,
yeah.
like,
But
rather
for Reamp,
than
it was very validating for us.
And so like, rather than, I see you, Miriam, you have one, I just want to, I'll come back to you in just a moment. So it's like, rather than the map showing what you thought it would, like highlighting the big outcomes,
Yes.
it highlighted your theory of change.
Yes, that is, yes.
That's really, I hadn't really thought of that. That's a really fascinating way of understanding what like a big difference between what we expected and what actually happened. Yeah, Mary.
Good question.
Yeah, when I did, it wasn't mapping, but a narrative sort of along the same lines. I found so much happened through relationship rather than more organizing element, and that's why I asked.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. One of the different, I have to say, in my mind, from the beginning, I wanted a timeline. I kept sort of like putting a timeline, like with, and Sarah kept saying, I don't know that we really need that. And and I was struggling technically with getting it. So I kept saying, well, we're going to try again. But in the end, we didn't. And so I still feel like this unmet need for a timeline. But the truth is, things went over time. And anyway, there was just a lot going on. And so it is really interesting, like what like somehow the timeline to me would illustrate those big outcomes in a way that anyway, it's just kind of interesting, just the whole thing of what you imagine you're going to see and what you want to show, the whole, all of it, like all of it ends up being surprising in some way or another. Anyway, so we have like 12 minutes left, and we want to leave a couple minutes for Kara to do announcements. And I just want to see if, especially for those of you who are not already deep in Kumu in some app and or haven't been with us previously, if there's any like big questions you're holding that you'll feel frustrated about if you don't get something from us before we quit today. It's just like, one of those like I'm like that. I'll be like, where is it? I want this. I want this. I'll just be sort of waiting for my answer. So if there's, maybe you're not like me and you're not quite so like that, but if there's anything, love to hear from those of you who are new. Seamus, go for it.
Thanks. Really great. Thanks, Sarah Ann, for the presentation. Just a question, and I think you were talking about doing this to the point of presenting it. And I'm the curiosity that's in me in when you presented it, how kind of heard from your side, like what sense did you get from people in how valuable they found it when they saw it at that stage? I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, I think when I gave the presentation, people found it really helpful. Like that visual component, I think really hit home all the things that I was saying, like the script that went along with it. I think when I talked about the map in plenary, like on the end of the third day when we were inviting people and showing them like how to access a milestone and tell us about it, I don't know if people were I don't know how well that landed with people in the room yet. I think, it's of course like something new. That's not something they do every day. So like definitely feel a little hesitancy. That's why I'm like, I think we're gonna have to get creative about finding ways to engage people with this. But as far as like an accompaniment to the story was very powerful and very useful. And I have found that true in just showing our network map, our social systems map during an orientation as well. Like it really kind of helps reinforce the story of who we are, what we do, and how people can take advantage of the network.
And I was trying to a little bit about what, like I remember when you talked like at the beginning, this was your thing. And then I remember there was a point when you talked with Melissa and maybe Gail about it and like how it, like Melissa's response.
Wait, I don't know what you mean now. I was
Well,
leading and I
so
did not.
When Seamus asked about people's response, I wanted you to also want to
Oh,
about Melissa's response.
oh yeah. So Melissa Gavin is our CEO, and I will say that the first time that I did show her the map of what we were doing, she was really excited by it, because she also found it to be a really powerful storytelling tool about who we are, what we do, and what impacts we have. I think she's going to be really interested if we can continue to build it out in the ways that we vision. I think it's going to be a really helpful tool for helping her like make a pitch to funders about why we need money and why we matter and how we impact people. And I think internally, something in the future that might be really interesting for us is to use it to visualize funding flows. I'm really thinking about resource allocation, like who or where money is being sent to. And then we can use that as a place for reflecting, like, are we really staying true with our goals and values here in REAMP? And is our allocation of resources in line with what our vision is?
Thanks very much.
Yeah. I'm seeing lots of questions, especially going more technical in the chat, and I'm not capable of parsing them at the moment. So if anybody else is watching and seeing anything that feels like we should touch on it, that it would be good, that everyone would be interested in, I would love you to do that. And I would also want to just continue to invite, especially the Canadians, if there are any questions that you're sitting with.
I was just wondering if the goal is to create an application or a platform methodology so that other people can use this. Like, are you going to take the lessons learned from this process and try to develop like a guideline or something for other people to follow the path?
I don't know, Christine, are you going to do that?
Well, so what I usually do is experiment a lot, discover stuff, and then decide if, because I don't know if you know, I'm the designer of the SUM app. If this is something that enough people would use that it's worth our investing in making some technical tweaks. I'm not to that point yet, and I don't know, but what I don't do, and what I think would be great if we had the capacity for, which is documenting and like methodology and processes. And that could be that's a much lower hanging fruit because it doesn't take a bunch of investment in paying a software developer, but it's also like not where my attention goes, and we haven't developed the capacity within our community of practice for that sort of thing. But I see the potential for that, and that would be cool, but we're not doing it at the moment. Yeah. Okay, and I see Sarah, I think you said a nope. Oh, so yeah, Sarah did not tap into. I sort of have read the ripple effect map stuff, but we didn't go back to it. I mean, it's just sort of in the back of my head, but we did not go back to it in this process.
Christine,
I'll just say for the record, it sounds like you're very close to it. Like the way you've done your interview sounds very similar to the like appreciative interview method, and like you're taking a lot, like you've adapted it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious of the like, since it is like a very formal defined methodology that they like to like have people follow or not, how much of it is inspired by conceptually versus technically following the letter of it. So that's helpful just to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to add that, like, from my reading, a group from the UK that is used this technique, it's more in a participatory way. So again, convening a smaller group, and I'm thinking for our network, which is not going to be as massive as the REAMP network, it might work better, but they're doing it in like quarterly. Well, our vision is to use it kind of every 3 months with the group. And I'm just curious about, using it as you're running alongside the development of your network versus, you've done a 20-year retrospective, which is a massive undertaking, it sounds like, but just being able to kind of, because we're setting it up now, be proactive in running alongside and being able to capture some of these things and maybe, 3 months or 6 month installments to kind of see what, anyway,
Yeah.
I think that's what we'd be kind of look for. And then we would be seeing the use of some app to further, we could do participatory, but those we couldn't reach. We could go through some app to reach them.
Right. And I'll just jump in. So going forward, the vision is, now that we've done the retrospective and now that we've gathered all this historical data, we will figure out a process for, I'm sure Sarah will continue to be doing some degree of participatoriness in in mapping the ripples going forward, but we will then also be the platform will help to carry that forward as well. So we will be figuring, that's sort of the next step that we haven't finalized, we haven't implemented yet, that we're still.
Yeah, I'd be interested to learn from
Yeah.
you as you do that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Sarah, did you want to? I mean, so
Yep.
part of the challenge is any kind of ripple, like the formal how you do it, like with 20 years and many hundreds of people, just wasn't feasible. So that's why, I mean, that was a piece of the approach. We just sort of approximated what we could. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like you're already thinking about it correctly. You're thinking about it at the forefront. I wish we would
No.
years ago.
No, and I think this approach and thinking has just more recently been, come to people's awareness. And, like you, the organization that Belize and I work for, similarly, we have to show the impact directly, or, I mean, we work through influence. So it's really interesting to be able to have those narratives, that story that continually be shared about the work we do. So no, I'm looking forward to learning from you guys going forward.
Cool. Kara, would you like to do announcements, and then we'll do our closing ritual, and then I'll stay on for anyone who wants to hang out some more.
Absolutely. It's my favorite time to do announcements because everything's in order because we start the new month next month. So on November 4th, we'll have our SenseMaking session. Amy and Curtis, community members of ours, tend to lead those sessions with Christine stepping in from time to time. I'm not sure if they have a topic in mind for this one that Christine might be aware of that I'm not aware of.
Curtis is going to do designing exchanges.
Excellent. Okay. A note of that.
Interesting.
And then for our on-ramp session, those are the second Mondays of the month. That's where we take a peek at a map, and especially for newer community members, it's a good way to get exposure to a map. We do not have one planned for November, so in case anybody is interested in joining us to share a map that they're working on, we always put out that ask. And then our deep dive is the third Monday of the month, and that is on the 18th. And Evan, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but Amy and Curtis did decide that they would be okay moving their topic if you would like to join us, if you happen to be available on the 18th. But
yes,
no
I will.
pressure.
I'm sorry I didn't respond to your email. I'll happily
that's
take you
okay.
up on that.
Okay.
Well, it'll either be lessons learned from working with big foundations, or it'll be some of a topic that Evan was eager to talk about as part of our deep dive, or as part of our on-ramp last week, that we thought was a good opportunity for a deep dive, depending on Evan's availability. Yeah.
And I have links in the chat for everybody.
Great, thanks. Okay, so our closing ritual, for those of you who don't know this, is I'll count down 3, 2, 1 in just a moment. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you're willing to do this, and when I get to unmute yourselves, I'll count down 3, 2, 1. When we get to 1, we just give each other our love and our blessings and appreciation for the day, and then just jump off. I just don't like a quiet, well, everybody sneaking away. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you all.
Happy to see
so
so many new
much.
faces.
Yes.
Happy Monday.
Bye.
Bye.
New faces. That's fun. Bye-bye. And then, if you want to stick around for whatever comes next. Sarah, are you staying or are you going?
I am gonna stick around.
Oh, yay! Okay. Are you Canadian? Are you okay? And then Evan, it looks like you might be sticking around for a little bit.
I'll stick around. I want to ask my wonky Tier 4 linkage questions, but I could also just do that separately by Slack.
Well, let's see if let's spend a moment being wonky.
I don't know how useful this will be for everyone else here.
Yeah.
But I'll try. So, hey everyone. I presented at the on-ramp last week. You can listen to the recording, and thank you again publicly. Sarah I met with really early on in our process, and it was really helpful for us to wrap our mind around what was possible for the map. So I don't know if I just never noticed this, but when I built our map, which is dual elements, so we have a map of organizations that participate in coalitions, and that's the kind of nestedness and why we wanted 2 elements for the map. Organizations are fundamentally different than coalitions, at least the way we wanted to kind of show it. And so the linkage is for connects organizations to coalitions, and linkage is just the technical sum app word, just saying this for folks that are newer to the platform. So when I built it, what I remember is that there was only a checkbox option for how organizations could say they participate in coalitions. And so we had two choices, member or convener. And now I looked at my defined linkage options and I'm like, oh my God, there's radio boxes and there's open, there's open response. And so my really technical questions are like, what would happen if I change it from checkbox to radio buttons, and will that break everything? I see you nodding, so I'll probably keep it as a checkbox. And then I guess I just want to like better understand what what all the qualitative text, open response implications for each of those would be. I'm just curious. I mean, I saw the view of it from the SumApp side, Sarah. I guess I'm curious to see what it looks like on Kumu. But on my end, I'm wondering if there's both a chance for public organizations to share, if they would like, more information about how they participate or convene or are connected to a coalition, or even a private, internal data notes for the map makers, or, for the administrator about, things we should know that won't be shared publicly with the map. And I say that because in SumApp, otherwise, for your general survey, what people can see about you, you can have like public information that shows up on a Kumu map, but you can also have, private fields that only are for the map administrators. Okay, those are my wonky questions.
Okay, and then I went to thinking I needed to show you something, and then my brain went into navigating tabs and clicks, etc. And so so that I could open it. And so I was not hearing not 100% attending to what you were saying. So apologies for that. You might have to repeat something. But I'm going to show you. So the first thing I was hearing is I'm going to show you my screen. I'm going to just assume that this is worth spending another couple minutes on, even for those of you who didn't ask the question. Okay. So, and let me just double check for those of you who are new. I'll just say this, and then if you link two projects, you have you still have your connection questions that are from person to person. So those are like personal relationship definitions. And then you can have you would always have this in the other project, questions about from organization to organization, of which you can have as many questions as you want. What's the relationship from this organization to that organization? And then you have questions, what we call a combo. Technically, we just call these combos because I don't know what else to call them. But the connect that are about the person to organization, or the organization to coalition, or the whatever, the two nested, the sort of smaller unit and then the larger unit that the small units are nested into. That might have been too confusing, but so Evan is talking about the person to organization connections, which in his context are organizations to, why won't that happen? So I'm going to share my screen. And this map is not, didn't get very far. This was a volunteer project, and this network didn't last. It lasted a year, so there wasn't much to do with it once we got the preliminary data in there. But Evan, so to this question, so if we say, let me just find, this is the one public facing option I have for this. And let me just, where's it? Looking for, okay, if we go with that one. So this was a working group, which was what we were using for organizations. And this is just saying about the focus of the working group. And what I wanted to show you was that, is there, no, it's not there. Sorry, I was hoping I could do this efficiently and I'm not, but so the thing I was going to show you was you could, like, let's say you had an open-ended text field in the connection, you could do, just like we do in our social system map, we could put on a toggle here that turns on a pop-up so that we would color that node a different color so that when we turn the toggle on, so that you can see which ones have text in the pop-up. And then when you hover over the link, which have text in the connection. And then when you hover over the link, there would be a pop-up that would show you the text. So you can just kind of, and I'll show you how that works in our map as people to people connections. And then Evan, I'm gonna guess that there were other pieces to your question that maybe are. So in this particular one, where's our story thing? No. Okay. So it would sort of color them, and then there would be a pop-up that right there, it would say, and I thought we had that for,
Ooh.
yeah, I thought we had, so there's a, yeah, so there's an open-ended text in our person-to-person relationships about why, tell us a little bit of a story about the relationship you have with this person. And when we click on one of these little teeny toggles, we can turn it on, and then we can see, and like, let's go to mine, and then we can.
Is this a sum app toggle or a Kumu toggle?
This is a Kumu toggle. This is just taking, it's just pulling in. So here's Mary Roscoe commenting about her relationship with me, right? So it's just we wanted to have this, be able to have narrative about relationship, and so that's the open-ended text field in some app. And then this is how we present it in a map, is with this little, if there's open-ended text, it'll be a different color. The line will be a different color, and when you hover over it, it'll give a pop-up with the content. I hope that was
so cool.
okay.
I don't know why I never noticed this before. I'm very excited. Thank you for showing this. The rest of the questions are something I can figure out, but I'm just really thrilled to see this. This
Cool.
is why I should come every week to these.
Well, here's the thing. Like Tim and I have been doing this for a decade almost, and we're still learning stuff. It's like you have your first round of what you have the capacity to learn, and there's always some more cool things hidden, but you just don't know they're there unless somebody, unless you get exposed to them. So that's why you didn't see it. But and that is a good reason to keep coming back. Okay. Are we good, Evan, with geekiness?
Yeah, I'm good. I yield to the Canadians.
I didn't hear your last sentence.
I said I yield to the Canadians.
Yay.
Thank you, Evan. Christine, I guess for our organization, one of the things that Belize and I and Kyla and I also work together, Kyla is doing some consulting work with our organization, small community, but just curious, like, we've been going through the materials and trying to understand, we're kind of stuck with what tier we would want to target in terms of getting some app. So I don't know if you have, I know I can go through, but like, it's tough because, well, Belize, maybe you want to say a little bit more, because I know you've been looking more into it.
For sure. And I've been spending quite a bit of time with SumApp during the summer. I think I wasn't able to attend these meetings, but I was in stealth mode following through YouTube. And so that was very, very helpful, which is at the same time intimidating a touch too when I see the super intense mapping, but it is a good vision to keep for the future. So I think where we are right now is we're just going to introduce this process to our network next week. So I'm preparing my slides in a way that, we have been connecting for the past 3 months and collecting some directory information, your name, which organization, which hat you wear, and stuff like those. But how about we start seeing some connections? So, and my hope is to ask for people to join me in start figuring out what kind of questions do we want to ask people to display on our map. So initially, I started with the free version of, okay, here are the people, names, and maybe 140 characters, and indicate your connections. But at the same time, I love the survey implementation of it, because that's so far what we have done with just a separate survey that we sent out, and maybe 1/3 of the community filled it out. And I feel like we can reach out to more if it's embedded in the tool itself. So, but at the same time, there's like, when it comes to tier 3 and 4, like, for example, this dual elements, I didn't pick up on that when I was studying it. So at this stage, maybe, and I understand there's an upgrade version available too. So how to start and maybe slowly, gradually increase it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just pretty much answered your own question as far as I can tell.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but so if you like, yeah, you probably want to go to tier 2, and then you'll have one connection question, which just gives, is what we call our technical jargon, just for lack of a better, is the ranking question, which is like that. How strongly are you connected? So you'll have that in tier 2. You won't be able to upload the survey data that you've already gathered in an upload in tier 2. So if you want to use the data you've already gathered in a survey, you're either going to, and you'll decide this based on how much data is already there, but you'll either need to manually put it into some app, which would be very tedious, or you'd need to go to a tier 3 account, and then you'd set it up. You'd get somebody's support maybe in using Tim's header maker and cleaning the data, and then upload the data into some app. But the thing to keep in mind, so if you just go to tier 2, you can like I always say, start with tier 2, and then when you start to want more stuff, like you see other fancy things that people are doing in the community of practice, and you go, oh, I want to do that, and then you discover, oh, that means we need to go to tier 3. That's the time to go to tier 3, and then tier 4. And the thing to keep in mind about tiers 3 and 4 is that once you've upgraded from tier 2 to tier 3, you can't go back down, because it's just like trying to stick a can of worms, like it gets so messy, and we don't have programmatically can't resolve all of the ifs, ands, or buts of you simplifying your data set. And so you're stuck at that next level.
Okay.
But is there more to that question? Have I missed any important?
No, that's just one quick question. Maybe it's not quick, but like one of the things that our organization has asked me to look into is just where the data is stored. So in terms of privacy, so when people enter, I know that there's privacy about, say, the organization who has the account with some app, but when the application is sent out to people and their information is collected, how can we best inform people about where that data is kept and how it's just because we have some very savvy older adults who are quite rightly so concerned about where their information is going.
Yeah. So the data lives in the SumApp database. So all member data, not account data, as you just distinguished. So member data lives in the SumApp database, and which lives in an Amazon Web Services server in Oregon. And so, and Amazon has a lot of ways of building in security. So, I mean, it's pretty robustly protected in terms of replicating instances, and I can't even talk about it, but and you as administrators have access to do whatever you want. Like you can download it in a CSV file, you can do whatever you want with it, and we're not controlling. I mean, we can't control what you do with it. We won't ever, like Kara and me and Tim and our developer are the only people who can access that data. We're never going to do anything with your data. I mean, we might, if you say, I've got a problem and there's a bug, we might go in and look at what's going on so we can address the issue, but we're not gonna, we never use it, we wouldn't sell it, etc.
Right.
And a thing to note that people will be concerned about, though, is that I'm sure you already know this, but the way people get access to their survey is through a link. And their link is unique to each person's link is unique to them. And there's no password, there's no login.
Okay.
So they need to protect their link. If they share it with somebody or if their email gets hacked, then that link would be available to whomever has hacked their email or whomever they've shared it with.
Okay.
And depending on if the map is already embedded in some app, I mean, if you share your link and the map isn't in some app, then the only person's data who can get gathered via that link is one's own. So if my email gets hacked and somebody clicks on my link, if the map's not in there, they're only going to access my data. If the map is in there, then they can see whatever data is being shown in the map.
Okay.
And for that reason, now, and there's a little bit more I could say about data security in Kumu, but before I get that deep, I'll see if this was enough.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we have Kumu and we use the private
Yeah.
private mapping piece there. So, okay. And I can follow up offline too if I have more questions, but I think that gives me a sense at least for initial. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else coming up? Kara, yes, Kara just put a link to our Slack. Yeah. And Kara and I are, and anyone who is in Slack and has answers is welcome to answer, but and we'd love that. But what mostly happens is me or Kara or Tim see things and answer. And Tim, for those of you, if you don't know, Tim is my husband and my partner in Greater Than the Sum, and it helps design some app, and he does more of our Kumu work. He does 95% of our Kumu work. So ends up being the expert in Kumu within our context. So other questions, other comments, or just thoughts that are coming up for anyone? Evan, was there anything more that would be useful for you?
Specifically, it's just always helpful to hear these questions and be here for research too for what I do now.
Yeah, cool. Mary or Sarah?
I had sort of the question around what I've noticed that sometimes there'll be an event or even an action and there isn't a direct causal impact thing, but then 5 years later, all of a sudden, there's been this sort of background, almost indiscernible sort of thing going on that results in a huge impact 10 years later or whatever. And I expect, though, with REAMP, things are tighter than that. I was just wondering about, in terms of mapping, whether, I don't know. Maybe it's not relevant in your case, or you don't see those types of things. It's more of a tighter situation.
I think, Sarah, you want to respond to that?
No, well, I was going to ask for clarification because I don't know if I quite understood the question.
Can I try?
Yeah.
So like emergence, like things that emerge that you weren't looking for, you weren't expecting, but then you realize 5 years later that something unexpected did emerge out of the conditions that were set in the community. Is that, Mary, what you're trying to say?
Yeah, or to be still abstract, but a little more specific, it's sort of like these smaller actions took place that all of a sudden came together 10 years later in something that was a major milestone that when you look at that major milestone, you realize that all of these smaller things happened and fed into making it possible for that larger thing to happen. Maybe that's still too abstract, but.
No, I'm mulling because I can't think of like a particular milestone where I like off the top of my head I could think of like how that played out. But what you described definitely played out in our map that we did this time, where we noticed that like there were a lot of little things that added up to big shifts. Like I think a great example of that for us was like our funding guidelines. You know, our funding guidelines that were established in chapter 1 were about funding campaigns that were ripe for victory. And we spent the next, 6-8 years doing that. And what we started to notice is like little data points adding up over time. Like people were getting really competitive and not collaborative. Like folks just weren't being strategic because they were only meeting once a year to try to make decisions together. We were seeing that a lot of big organizations were taking credit for the work that little organizations were doing, but they weren't getting paid for that. Like there was all kinds of like little data points like this that then led to a big shift. But it's hard to like some of those other little data points that we have aren't necessarily milestones that showed up on the map though either. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe that's a good question and something that I feel like we need to be maybe trying to pay attention to see if there are some of those like kind of patterns that we start to notice over time.
Well, and I think the opportunity to see leverage points, so mapping and being able to see where, to your point, Mary, where those small pieces might be attributing to or contributing to the major relationship that causes that bigger impact. Because I think to the comment about emergence, I mean, that is, you're describing emergence, like, these small things, it's not one big change that's going to happen. It's these small things that pop up and then they accumulate, whether it's over time or sometimes it happens all at once, that moves the system or shifts it, I should say, in the direction you want it to go.
Yeah, I think June Hawley has a graphic that sort of illustrates that, but for me, it was always frustrating in terms of reporting. Usually reporting is done on a yearly basis, and because the impact didn't exist during that time period, it came later. And still at that later point, the reporting is, anyway, it was very frustrating for me.
It's interesting because what we're grappling with is how do we measure relationship and have relationship seen as an outcome in and of itself? And, how do we, even if it's on an annual basis, like the map that Sarah, you showed where it grew from here to here, and some of those things that are starting to gain momentum and point to the opportunity to have greater impact emerge. Just something I'm playing with, like what if you are able to incentivize relationship versus, the actual outcome? Because a healthy network presumably should continue to produce good outcomes. Just like, if we feed our body well, we should have healthy outcomes, right? So, yeah.
Well, and how I'm hearing this is a question of like, our theories of change that we're sharing with the world should include setting conditions.
Mm,
And
mhm,
then the conditions should, you know, some of the I mean, like, then what we can try to do is figure out which of how to understand shifts in the conditions as opposed to outcomes. Because
mm,
yeah, funding is generally a really arbitrary, not very emergent structure and not supportive for emergence. But if we have good logic for,
mhm,
you know, there should be more trust in the network. There should be more, you know, flow of
Mhm.
information. And then how can we measure flow of information? How can we measure trust? How can we measure our capacity to collaborate well? How can we measure our collective understanding of system change? How can, you know, like
mhm,
whatever feels like those are the key conditions that we need to shift,
mhm.
then
What,
Yeah.
yeah, what I noticed in the network that I was part of, that if you, I just looked in retrospect at like 6 people who started very humble organizations like Outdoor Afro and different ones, but they were in relationship and sort of helping each other. And so even though they started at a very humble place, like 2 years later, they were at the White House for conferences and so on. And I think it was by virtue of this informal of trust, what Christine is saying, that created the conditions that enabled their work to be more impactful.
yeah. And that's a really fuzzy, misty,
Yes.
intangible.
Yes.
And sometimes I feel like a lunatic trying to figure out like how to put that into a technical interface and gather it directly from people. It's a big,
Yeah.
it's a lot, but it is kind
It,
of the-
it can look like you're not really doing anything when you're developing the conditions,
yeah.
you know, because the impacts aren't showing up in predictable ways. Yeah.
Sarah, let you have the last word. In case there's anything in there that's been triggered by this conversation.
Yeah, I don't know.
I thought I'd see if I could put you on the spot and make you speechless. No, I'm teasing.
You did. Good job.
I'm just looking at all the sunshine
I-
sunshine connection links to you.
Yeah.
No, this was just fun. Like, I just have to say, like, I always appreciate the invitation to come in and share what we're doing, because even in some of the questions you asked, right? Like, oh, Mary, you asked earlier about this theory of change. Hadn't really thought of that before, right? Until somebody asks you the question. So I
Yeah.
always really appreciate the community for that, because even if I'm coming in with my own thinking, I'm always thinking of getting new ways of thinking about those things I've been thinking about. So it's just delightful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us, and please do add yourselves to our Slack and reach out if you have questions, and come back so we can see your lovely faces again.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much.
you. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.